if you're going to survive as a brand, I think you have to take ownership of your brand. And I think what you say to that ownership of the brand will be important. Your online and offline personalities need to match. I think you need to be aware that your brand is now open to more scrutiny than it's ever been. So there's no way to hide. I think you have to be consistent in your behavior. I also think you need to reach out to the community to whom you are interacting with, rather than sitting back and waiting.
Hello everybody and welcome to another Digital Rapport podcast. And on today's episode we have Ninder Johal DL, that's Deputy Lieutenant of West Midlands. And Ninder is the owner of the Nachural Group, which encompasses the music label Nachural Records, Nachural Record events, and he's the publisher of the Business Influencer magazine. So welcome Ninder, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Good afternoon. It's nice and well, it's nice outside, but it's a bit frosty. But yeah, good. Everything's good.
Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time out to have this conversation today. And I just wanted to pick your brains and share with the listeners about the whole idea and concept of influence. So just to get the conversation started, what is influence?
I think we're all influencers. It just may be that our sphere of influence, in other words, the amount of people we can influence, can vary depending on the sector you work in, could vary on the sort of the industry and the type of work you do. It might vary on geography. So it might be that just within a certain geographical area. Might actually be that you're very influential within your family circles. But I think we're all influential. It just depends how you want to define the word influence. And I suppose the other definition is, how do you measure it? How do you know when someone is influential or isn't? And to one person, individual A may be influential, but to person B, that person may not. So it's really all in the eye of the beholder. And really you let other people determine, I think, whether you're influential or not in any particular given situation, because you could be influential just in a situation. Just at that moment in time, you make that big call. So you're influential. Maybe you're influential over a period of time. And maybe you're influential over a period of time in another geography and then in another geography. So, look, it's quite a complicated, but nothing new. As human beings, we're all in a position to influence someone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I always find it fascinating around that topic of influence, because it's like you said, in different situations, in different scenarios, you may have that influence based on, for example, achievements. It could be based on positioning. It could be based on expertise. It could be based on music. Like you guys were very influential in the Bhangra industry when you originally started the music band. So it's like you said. I mean, it really depends on the perception people have in the kind of spheres and areas that you're working in, right?
That's right, completely. And you may or may not think you're influential. Other people will determine that. And I'll tell you how you know whether people perceive you are influential or not, is the amount of times they seek your advice. And I think if they seek your advice, then there's some value attached to whatever you say. And if there's a value attached to whatever you say, then there is an element of influence.
Yeah, no, definitely. I got a question for you in regards to, so when you basically had the award for DL and became Deputy Lieutenant, right? Does that mean we have to salute you now?
No, I don't think so. No. I'm the representative of the Lord Lieutenant, who's the representative of the Queen. But yeah, again, I think that role in itself assumes that you have a position of influence, so that if a message or something needs to be sent out to a community, then you're in a position that's regarded as influential enough to be able to put that message out. Yeah. So we're the conduit between the royalty the Lord Lieutenant, and the community, really. So, yeah, so one assumes, I can only assume, that I was of sufficient influence to be invited to become a DL, of which I'm very proud.
No, that's amazing. I mean, we're also proud of you. I mean, watching your journey over the years is like really, it's inspirational as well. Not just
Thank you.
So it's good to see that. So if we talk a bit about that, let's explore that a bit. I mean, what do you let's talk a bit about your achievements. I know we don't always like to. It's not really bragging, but sharing with the world about what you've done, because you've done a lot of things in music industry as well as business, and a lot up north in the West Midlands, right? So if we have a little conversation about what do you think built up, like what built up to that place where you did think get invited to become the deputy lieutenant.
Um, I'm assuming I don't know. I mean, I haven't asked the question. Why was I picked? What led you to that decision? But I think I've been fortunate that I've sort of operated in sort of three different sectors now in terms of professions. So there's the music industry, and you're right. I started a band called the Jana with VJ. So I did majority of them a tabla player. I did a majority of the management leadership side behind it. What was really interesting about leading a band of creatives is understanding how to make sure that each creative musician is enabled, has the freedom to fulfill that potential creatively, whilst at the same time making sure that every musician plays within a structured format, a team format, because the audience doesn't want to hear 7 different musicians; they want to hear one band. And so that was supposed my first experience of leadership, and the beauty behind that was traveling all around the world, doing big shows. That was really, really enjoyable. So we played with people like Fatboy Slim, Tom Jones, who, by the way, he's brilliant on stage. Tom Jones, Prodigy. Way back when we first started, Boney M were just on their way out, and we were just coming in. And we played with them on Jumeirah Beach, around 120,000 people, which itself was quite a thing to see. Then, of course, I set up the label, Nachural Records, and then, of course, I was in the great position to see the track Mundial do Batike chart number 5 in the UK, chart number 7 in the US because of Jay-Z, chart number 2 in the German charts, chart number 1 in Italy, knocked off Ronan Keating, and then registered another 8 number 1s, which made it the biggest global Bhangra track of all time.
Wow.
And I suspect, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm going to see that in my lifetime again. And I suppose, if anything, my legacy I leave behind is that while it took me over a decade to do it, my dream of taking a Bhangra track into the mainstream was indeed fulfilled. And I suppose what was the real pleasure behind it was to see our track, a Punjabi track, completely battering charts around the world.
Yeah.
And the form of music, and you'll know this, where really we all thought that it only belonged to us, that really nobody else was interested. That, people in Greece, in Italy, in South America. I suppose the biggest thing was when we sold it back to the Indians. That was quite a feat in itself. But I suppose, yeah, that has to be the highlight. And then from music, I moved into event production. So I do the Signature Awards in Birmingham. I do the Natural Entrepreneurship Awards in Leicester, which you've been to. We do the Natural Business Awards in Wolverhampton, and then we do the Signature Awards again in London. And they were progressing really, really well, and we did very well with them. And they're mostly geared towards entrepreneurs and SMEs. And the move into that was quite easy, really. I just took the skills I learned in the music industry, which is around branding, marketing, messaging, and just took it into a particular marketplace. And I seem to meet Asian entrepreneurs all the time, so entrepreneurship seems to be the place to take it. And having done the journey myself with Bhangra music, it seemed a natural place to go. And that part of the business has flourished, really, really done well. We've done really well with that. And then, of course, COVID came along.
Mm.
And so the events had to stop. And that's when the new magazine, I don't know if you can see it, there we go, called The
Yep.
Business Influencer. That's when that came up. And that was really building on the success we had in the events business. And was to say to that audience, well, whilst we're not doing events, we'll continue to send you content, but actually we'll send it in a magazine format.
Yeah.
And that's worked really well. That's worked really, really well. So yeah, that's the journey. So my guess is I've had the good fortune to meet a lot of influential people from business and music and so forth. That sort of led itself to the title. And because I've done relatively well in music and events, and of course, publishing's only just started now. And maybe that's why somebody somewhere said, well, he wouldn't make a bad DL because of what he's done to date.
Yeah.
And of course, the other big thing, Jatinder, when people talk about being influential, sometimes you can be influential by doing things that don't benefit you. Now that sounds a bit strange, but let me explain. So, so the moment I sort of stepped out of the music market, I was determined to put something back into society. So I joined as a governor at a local little school. You know, if you've got a skill set that can assist other institutions, I think you should.
Yeah.
Then I became a chair of a charity called Steps to Work. I became president of the Black Country Chamber of Commerce. Now, none of these things benefited my business, but it was a way of me putting something back. And I think by doing those type of things, you can become influential, even though it's got nothing to do with your business, if that makes sense. Because by operating in spaces that are outside of your business, you tend to meet people that are different to you.
Absolutely.
You tend to meet people who have a different skill set to you. And it's in those areas you do most of your learning, because you're learning stuff that you know nothing about. And I think the more knowledge you have, the greater there's the chance that you can become influential. And the reason behind that is more knowledge leads to better decision making. Better decision making means you make the right calls, and therefore people see that, and you say the right things, and therefore they start to see you as influential. And by the way, makes you a better person as well.
That's fascinating.
So that's the sort of the steps.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I just wanted to, you know, you're talking about the music side, and you were putting artists out there, and obviously, you know, the music industry is massive anyway, and as an artist grows, the influence on that side of things grows as well. And then you moved into the events side of stuff. You know, with the events, when you guys were doing awards and stuff, I mean, because this is obviously going to be based on influence as well. When you guys were doing the awards and awarding people, how were you going about like the criteria and, you know, the judging of, you know, who's going to be an award winner and all that kind of stuff? Because obviously that there's massive influence that plays a role in that as well, right?
Yeah. So I always say to people, and it's probably more relevant now than it's ever been, is with social media, you have the opportunity to promote your brand, both as an individual, but also as a business.
Yeah.
And I think your brand or your influence starts to take traction dependent on what people say about you. So the more people say positive things about you, the greater the probability that your brand is being enhanced. And that's really what it's down to. So when we were looking to do the awards, the main emphasis behind it was, how can we promote business? How can we promote enterprises and SMEs? Because without them, the country and the economy can't function. So the awards night came together with three particular aspects. One was learning. So we normally have a great keynote speaker that the audience can learn from. So that's the learning aspect. The second thing is, and I know it's been difficult at the moment, but the second is, by being in the room with 500 people, 550 people, it's an opportunity to learn from the people in the room.
Mm.
people who are in different industries, different sectors, and possibly even create new business connections. So that was the second bit. And the third one was celebrating by giving awards out to people. So that's and the criteria really dependent is how long has the business been operating,
Mm-hmm.
what its key achievements, what does its balance sheet and profit and loss account look like, and what does the future look like for this business, and how's it done in comparison to other people in the same sector. So you bring all that together, and that's when the judges arrive at a winner.
Okay, so yeah, so when you're doing the events and stuff, you had the opportunity to basically, like you said, learning element. You bring in someone doing keynote speaking. That was that based on someone who's got a skill that they can share, or how did you go about selecting the person who would be doing the kind of teaching side of stuff on stage?
Okay, so the person that we normally picked had to have a story.
Mm-hmm.
So they need to have a story to tell people. Because if they have a story, then people can see why they've arrived from one place to another.
Yeah.
Then people are more happy to listen and say to themselves, "Oh, well, I want a bit of that story. How can I be a bit of that story? And what can I learn from this person so I can have a story similar to that?"
Mm-hmm.
So you tend to pick people with a story, people with a sense of achievement. But also, you've got to pick someone who can articulate all those things whilst they're speaking as well.
Yep.
So you can't just pick anyone. You've got to be able to make sure they can articulate that journey. And they're the sort of type of things we looked at. And I think over the years, that's become an important component of the evening, is the keynote speaker.
Yeah. No. I mean, I've attended one of your events, and I think we had at that particular one, I think Jajar was speaking at that one.
That's right.
Yeah, that's it was good, interesting stories that he was sharing. So that's quite cool as well. And then I suppose it's like you said, it's the similar kind of thing when it comes to the actual businesses themselves. It's based around the achievements and what they've done. And how important do you feel that it is to actually celebrate those achievements? Because not everybody's doing it, but you guys are doing it. Like, how important is that to showcase that side of things?
I think it's our duty to inspire the next set of entrepreneurs to say, look, go and create those businesses, because you will then create the future jobs. The future jobs will create the future economy. So it's very, very important. Being an entrepreneur and setting up a business is one of the biggest challenges you'll ever have. It's not easy. And I think for someone to have achieved something, we ought to celebrate it, because to get to where they got to is not easy. It's hard. It's very risky, long hours, lonely place. So yeah, that was one of the principal reasons of making sure that. But of course, remember I said we hold the events for all the other reasons as well.
Yeah.
The learning aspect, the networking aspect, the socialization aspect, and just having a good time, but putting it all together as a package so that it works. So and thankfully it's worked, not just in Wolverhampton, not just in Leicester, not in Birmingham, but also now progressively in London as well.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I mean, just then, like, moving on to like your magazine, because now it's a business influencer magazine, right? That's what it's a nice progression. It's funny, it's got Nachural Records, but there's a natural flow to your business as well as to the kind of connected synergies with everything you've done, right? So with your magazine, how did that come about? What was you shared a little bit, but what kind of triggered that?
Yeah, that wasn't that difficult actually. My business partner, my wife, Ninder. So we sort of every month or so we'll put down a bunch of ideas that we think would like to do in the future. And we tend to park them for a variety of reasons. One could be we haven't got the time. Could be we haven't got the skill set. Could be it requires a lot of money at this moment and would rather use that somewhere else. So it could be a variety of reasons. And the magazine was something we always wanted to do because we always thought as the event side was continuing to grow, we were building up a good audience. And it seemed at some point in the time to be able to offer them another product.
Mm.
And so the magazine was always there playing in the background. And then obviously on March the 23rd, when the Prime Minister said we have a lockdown, I think by middle of April, end of April, we thought this could be a prolonged lockdown. Is there anything we can do whilst the lockdown continues? So we pulled out those ideas, went through those ideas, and popped up the magazine. We thought, well, the reason we've got here, we didn't do it in the past, is we didn't have the capacity, the time, because we were so busy with the events. Well, actually, time we have, something we wanted to do. We think we've got the skill set to do it. Admittedly, it's a totally different sector, publishing. And then once that decision had been made, we went for it. Now, the interesting thing about making those kind of decisions is the idea generation was happening when things were good. So making the decision when things are difficult is not that hard, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now we hear the word necessity is the mother of invention. So when you're up against it, you got to. I think sometimes it's good to have the ideas when you're free of stress, and then to implement them at the right time. So you're making the right decisions at the right time for the right reason, as opposed to we have to do something, panic. We're going to have to do something, which is the necessity is the mother of invention. So I will say once we get back to normal times, I would say to people, take time out during the normal month of the week and generate those ideas when you're in the right place to generate those ideas.
Yeah.
And then implement them when the right time comes, but you won't rush it because you'll have done the thinking behind it before, if that sort of makes sense. So the magazine, a lot of people said, oh, it's a bright new idea. Well, actually, it wasn't that new and it wasn't that bright because it was in our plan from quite a while. So execution becomes much easier if the rationale has already been worked out previously. So I would say to people, when you're in stress, that's not the right time sometimes to make decisions because you haven't had the luxury of having to think it through. So I think, if possible, when they say when it's sunny outside, do the right things. Don't wait for the rain to come in because then it's the roof and the roof goes. So always try and generate ideas when you're at your best. That's during good times rather than stressful times.
Yeah, no, that's some real good gems then. I mean, it's I think one, you're showing adaptability. Two, you got this entrepreneurial spark, but you also said something very, very important because you said like having a calmer and relaxed mind is when the ideas and solutions seem to come. And when you're stressed and all over the place is when it's not, you're right, it's not a good place. It just actually adds more to your mind and your plate.
Well, I think a classic example is, I don't know if you play football, but if you're asked to take a penalty in the local park with your friends, you'll probably score 10 times out of 10. Somebody puts you in a high pressure point in front of 100,000 people in a cup final. That's a totally different set of scenarios. That's pressure point. And you're probably not going to score 10 out of 10 because the pressure takes over and it just changes the way you see the whole thing. So if you can take yourself to the local park every time with no pressure, you're more likely to score. So I think, it's something we started to do regularly was to generate ideas during the good times, and that's come back to suit us.
That's I mean, it's fascinating using that example of like that's influence in itself. I mean, if you take the example of football, we've seen it so many times when people they're about to do a penalty kick, they've messed up, and all of a sudden that influence it's had on the country, on the team, and potentially the player is like, oh, it could go positively or negative depending on what happens in that situation, right? I mean, that's the burden, isn't it? That's like the dark side of influence. If you want to, talk a bit about that, like what are the kind of downfalls that could happen with just having the kind of position,
Yeah. I think I say to people who have big followings on social media, I say to them, with that comes responsibility. Because if you are now a person of influence, then whatever comes out of your mouth can have an effect on other people. So be careful the word you use, the manner in which you use those words, and when you use those words, because that really will be important. And their positioning has now changed. Some people choose to take that advice, other people don't, and they just continue, and then it does come back to haunt them because they said the wrong thing,
Yeah.
and it completely, blows up in their face.
It's the experience and lessons of life in those kind of situations.
Yes.
Definitely, definitely. Let's talk a bit about more about the magazine. So, in your magazine, I mean, what's like the format? Like, who are you interviewing? How are you getting these people together? And it's called Business Influencer. Like, what's the kind of drive and long term kind of goal with this, or what is it that you're hoping?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, so what we so it's originally set up to fill that gap between the events. And so we asked ourselves, normally in periods of crisis or in any period really, any person in business or in life who wants to become better than they are now, they need to understand as much of the environment in which they operate. So even if you're not in business, you still need to know what's going on around you. So we looked at topics that we think if you want to become an influential player yourself, or you want to become a better version of yourself, then if you can learn about entrepreneurship, about leadership, decision making, about the role of tech, because that's changing everything. So this morning I was doing a podcast for that, because we have a podcast for the business influencer, and I interviewed a senior guy in 5G technology.
Hmm.
So he spoke about what 5G technology will bring to the world. So we talk about tech, we talk about finance. So anybody who's running a business, and even if you're not running a business, you still need to understand finance. We then talk about place, and the places where we live, the places where we work, the places where we shop, and how that's now being changed because of COVID. So, example, if you look at the high street, some of the retail outlets are disappearing, may never see them again. Yet, if you look at online retailers like Amazon, they're making more money than they've ever done. So that's changing, and our shopping habits are changing. So we talk about place, the importance of place. So, and then we talk about what's happening today. So we've had reports in previous editions how COVID has affected Kenya. We had a great report on that. We had how COVID has affected India and how they recovered or trying to recover. And we've got a piece in this one that's just coming out today. It's just arrived today, so it'll be distributed out today. So we've got a great piece around Trump going. How does that change the world? How does that change us leaving Brexit? How does that change our relationship with China and our relationship with the EU? So we've got some great pieces on that. We've got a great thought leadership piece from Seth Godin,
Oh, nice.
who's he's the number one sort of marketing guru, and he talks about what marketing should look like going forward. And he's an American entrepreneur. And then we've got articles around mental health. So what can we learn from New Zealand? So there's an article in there, clinical psychologist from New Zealand explains how to cope with something like COVID. We've got pieces around how digital now will change the way we live in terms of place. We've got a great article on Easy Food,
Oh, yeah.
and they're the competitors to Uber Eats.
Yep.
So they explain how they've expanded during COVID. So they've experienced. In the version that's coming out next, we talk to people in the events industry, and they're the reverse. They're saying how they've suffered. We've had articles from people in the food industry. We've had articles around how COVID has also changed, is how we see the environment, and how suddenly people like Tesla are pushing the frontiers of electric cars. So there's a great article in there around batteries and what the new car looks like. It's how the automotive industry is going to work. We've got an article in there around the forthcoming March budget and how entrepreneurs should think about budget. So it's all things around leadership. And I'd say there's a brilliant article in the one that's just was out last edition. Well, it was a lady who took on a failing school.
Right.
That was financially in deficit. Only 30% of the teachers were permanent, so the rest were on supply. You can imagine 70% of your employment are part-timers, and that falling numbers. And she turned the whole place around. Ninder Johal is her name, and it's now financially strong. It's a high-performance school, and she was awarded an OBE by the Queen for what she did.
Wow.
So there's things you can learn about leadership on how people can turn around failing schools. So articles around everything that somebody in business would want to know. And we were hoping by the end of time, every time you read the magazine, you put the magazine down, you say, I know more about the world now than I did yesterday.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, we've done what we set out to do.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating stuff, because that's the key, isn't it? Learning from people who've already done it and picking their kind of mind and insights just allows that information to be real and raw, because there is a lot of fake news. There's a lot of noise, there's loads of nonsense out there as well. And it's good to see these kind of articles and things that you guys are doing with legit people, right? Which is just going to be beneficial to everyone. Like, how are you going about actually selecting people? If somebody wants to be in your magazine, like what's that like, or what's your criteria? Just in case for people who are
yeah. So we've had people approach us, said we'd like to write about this, or we'd like to write about that. We've turned a few people down because their article was really all about sales. Because they were trying to sell their business.
Right.
This is what our business. And we said people are not interested in that. And so what we tend to look at is once we've read it, is there anything new in that magazine or in that piece that I didn't know about? And if it's sharing a story or there's bites of knowledge or influence in there, then we run with it. So example, in this one that's just come out today, there's a brilliant piece around globalization and how that affects where we live. And that's by PwC, the #1 accountancy firm.
Right.
Brilliant piece on how globalization will affect us and how COVID will affect us. And that's already getting rave reviews. So yeah, we have to be selective. We have to have the right stuff in there. But we've already generated global interest. So we're close. We haven't done it yet. We're close to doing a deal with an American company that will take our product into some of the stores in America.
Right.
And they liked the magazine. They thought it was good. They thought it was international. And of course, what's also different about the magazine is because of the events, we've got to know a lot of people from different sectors. But here we go. But we all look different. And so therefore, once you start to get through the magazine, you're reading people with Chinese backgrounds, Afro-Caribbean backgrounds, Nigerian backgrounds, American backgrounds, British backgrounds, the whole shebang. So it's so diverse in its content and the people background. It's a very appealing read.
No, I mean that's an amazing thing in itself, because I suppose this is interesting. So it's almost like because it's when you look at the mainstream magazine, the stuff that's out there, you could say it's biased towards one side or another, right? But you guys are coming in from diversity, just bringing out lots of different people, so it becomes appealing to a much wider audience in that context, right? And that's influence in itself.
So what we haven't got, so we haven't got just all corporates. We haven't got just all SMEs and micros. We've got the right mix. So we had a great article from the Vice Chancellor of the University of Wolverhampton, who explained how when lockdown happened, they had to change their entire model from teaching physical one-to-one in a big classroom to a digital approach, and how you get all that material. So there's some fascinating insights into how you run big operations and how you cope. And I remember one in the first edition, a lawyer of a big firm had been promoted, I don't know, I think on the 20th or the 21st or something like that. And his first day in the job, they had to lock down.
Mm-hmm.
And he had to try and handle how do we lock a whole place down?
Yeah.
And how do I talk all to our clients? And how do I talk to all my solicitors and my
Wow.
lawyers? My gosh. So imagine that on day one, being your day one in is you're in lockdown.
Yeah. See,
So it's interesting. And a lot of people read a lot of interest out of that.
Yeah. Now I can imagine. I mean, it's this whole situation is going to bring about a lot of change in technology and the way we do things. It's getting people to think differently. So it's definitely interesting times. Definitely interesting times. Yeah, no, I mean, this has been fascinating. I mean, you've been sharing about like branding. We've been talking about positioning. We've been talking about connections, community, networking. Right. There's such a vast array of different things that need to happen or take place in order to allow someone to be of influence. And then the perception that's created as to when people, when they're in the public eye or they're seeing this, and the different industries, you could potentially go into a different industry with different perceptions. It's been fascinating to hear all that. If any last words before we kind of finish off on this podcast that you want to share in regards to influence?
I think I'd say to anybody, I think because of where we now, sort of the globally connected, digitally connected world, I think if you're going to survive as a brand, I think you have to take ownership of your brand. And I think what you say through that ownership of the brand will be important. Your online and offline personalities need to match. I think you need to be aware that your brand is now open to more scrutiny than it's ever been. So there's nowhere to hide. I think you have to be consistent in your behavior. I also think you need to reach out to the community to whom you are interacting with, rather than sitting back and waiting. I think by being proactive, you're better suited to deal with a crisis when it comes along than being reclusive. I think if you can put things back into the community with which you operate, the chances are that you will benefit. Even if your business doesn't, you will as a person will benefit. And I think my overall thing is always be careful about what you say. Always plan ahead about what you say. And I think if you're an entrepreneur, congratulations on being an entrepreneur and well done on the input you're making into whichever area of business you operate in. And if you're thinking of becoming an entrepreneur, why haven't you become one? I think you should be becoming one. And I think with tools like this great podcast you've got here, and if you listen to us, we put as is called the Business Influencer Podcast. I would ask everyone to try and learn as much as you can by listening to podcasts like Jatinder's, by reading as much as you can, but more importantly, probably meeting and talking to people who look different to you, who dress differently to you, and who speak differently to you. Because that's your greatest area for learning and improvement.
That's the bit that takes you out of your comfort zone, isn't it? That's the new stuff you're not aware of. So that's fascinating information.
And that's the stuff that will improve you.
Definitely. And Ninder, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best thing for them to do?
Look, I'm easy to find. I think most people are easy to find on social media. And if you want to subscribe to the magazine, again, just DM me. You can DM me, or you can contact nachural.co.uk. And the magazine is out today, the new edition. And I just wanted to thank you for taking time out and having a great discussion with you.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. I hope everybody enjoyed that, and we'll join you on the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you.